That's when I learned the most important lesson about federal prison. The system doesn't really care about my survival, and medical care is optional, and you're there for punishment. And to the system, I had a year and a day sentence. It almost became a death sentence.
Welcome back. This is Andreea Parc.
And Alexa Dumitru.
And this is a Live Again podcast, a podcast where attorneys and other professionals meet to discuss real life challenges and how our decisions shaped our journeys. Today, we have the pleasure of having with us a miracle of nature, I would say, Mr. Joseph Gregorio. He is a federal sentencing strategist and founder of JN Advisor, specializing in mitigation strategy for white-collar defendants facing federal charges. After 20 years career on Wall Street, managing over $50 million in client assets, Joseph faced his own federal case and achieved a 75% sentence reduction from 41 to 51 months to only 20 months and 1 day without a cooperation agreement, and then serving only 25% of his time through systematic case preparation. Thank you, Joseph, for being here with us. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Likewise, thank you kindly for having me.
I've been reading your bio and listening to your journey, and it's absolutely fascinating how you were able to obtain this reduction. I went to trial. I chose to go to trial. And I had two sets of attorneys by the standards back then and by what I thought were the best in Manhattan. And I didn't get close to a reduction. Even I got a superseding charge, a penalty for going to trial. So the work that you're doing right now, it's absolutely necessary. And before I have a bunch of questions here, but before I start, I want to ask you, the legal defense, I found it as a wall to be open to negotiations and to reductions, and being the fancy criminal defense attorneys that they know everything. They don't need anybody from the outside. How do you find this in your practice?
Most attorneys treat sentencing like a legal problem. They argue the guidelines, they cite precedent, fight all the technical points, and that matters. But what they don't teach in law school, judges are humans making life-altering decisions about humans. From 41 to 51 months to a year and a day, and then serving 125 days. When I was going in the very beginning, I started studying federal judges and heard what they expect. Basically came forward as soon as the SEC called me and had a very strategic focus. I interviewed 3 attorneys. As soon as the SEC called me, I asked them if I could give them a call back. And when I interviewed my attorneys, I told them what I know and the way I want things to be treated, and I hired my attorney on that basis. He agreed to incorporate a lot of things that I wanted to do. But yeah, mitigation is very important to tell your story and to shine the correct light on us, who we are as a person, and not just the worst period or the worst mistakes that we make. Sentencing isn't about proving you're a good person. It's about proving you understand why you made a terrible choice and that you've done the internal work to become someone who won't make that choice again, who will never be in another courtroom again. And that's not legal argument. That's human persuasion, human perspective, and it's the difference between someone getting 40 months and 8 years.
It took me a while to get to the perspective that you just mentioned now. So that is extraordinarily important for people to understand very early on in their process, because we're getting defensive and we're not accepting responsibility for our own mistakes. I mean, of course, in my case, I believed that the charges were inhumane to what I did. But if I would have accepted responsibility as I do now, I'm sure that the outcome would have been very different.
Yes, and early mitigation for me actually probably helped me get a better plea deal, my attorney said. And May of 2021, when the Securities and Exchange Commission called me, it wasn't until 7 months later, and I wanted to focus on things that I had control over. So coming forward, falling on the sword right away, owning what I did. I didn't have any co-defendants. The firm that I was working for at the time didn't even know what I did. I was waiting for the call, and I even forfeited all my items a month later in June. I had things that I purchased with ill-gotten gains, and I brought everything into my attorney's office. I was there the whole day. He said, "I've never seen anyone like you bringing in cash and all these types of things that maybe someone else would hide or give it to."
Hide.
I wanted a clean slate. I wanted to do this the right way. If I'm coming forward and owning what I did, and so much of the years of working on Wall Street was all about money. It was just a very toxic greed environment that, and then getting a second chance at life, you realize that the true wealth is your health.
Now, going back to your life on Wall Street, and because this podcast we discuss about the decisions that we're making and how those impacted our lives, what were some beliefs or pressures or temptations that drove your decisions back then?
At the time when I was working, it was all about every 20 trading days, making as much gross you can throughout the month and moving the money around and charging percentage on each trade. And, I had a lot of speculative clients, but they were all accredited. And then what really happened was when the crash happened in 2008, and I watched institutions older than the Civil War collapse in days that I had clients in. I was witnessing something that I couldn't believe. Every day, the market opens, you see your money line evaporating, there's nothing you can do. And, I had clients in things that were safe. I mean, Lehman Brothers, a 158-year-old bank, Fannie Mae, AAA rated by S&P and Moody's, except they weren't. And when those institutions collapsed, I was watching, portfolios disappear on screens. And I watched, I had 3 arbitrations after that, and I settled, paid them all in 2011. I wasn't really drinking yet. Yeah, but at that time, when you're going through such a collapse, the contagion was just, there was no safe haven in the market. I didn't just lose my clients' money, I lost myself trying to cope with what I'd lost them. And when you're running from guilt and you start drinking with a bottle in your hand, you're going to make decisions that the sober version of you would never make. And that's how addiction turns professionals into criminals.
I really like that line. I really liked what you just said.
Because it's as unfortunate as it is, it's the truth. And being a former attorney, I work a lot with attorneys, and basically this is the main issue that drive attorneys to discipline, is the pressures and addictions, ultimately, that drive them to make those decisions
They
would
wouldn't
not
have otherwise made.
otherwise. Yeah, that is wonderfully put, unfortunately. And as we all know, we both know, the fall from success to incarceration is a journey that very few people can imagine, let alone understand. What was the hardest truth that you had to confront when you went to prison?
When I went to prison, the hardest truth was what I've done. I created victims. You think about them and you can't undo what you've done. Even though you're going to serve your punishment, their pain doesn't end. And the realization was like going into prison. I had redemption's a lifelong commitment, and it doesn't end after I'm out of prison or off of probation. It's a lifelong commitment to atone for what we did. Look at yourself in the mirror eventually, and be confident and proud of who you are, and earn back society's trust bit by bit, step by step. There's only so much you could do at that point, Andrea, that you tried to repair. You can't really repair the majority of it. It was extremely hard to this day, every day. In my gut, in my core, is thinking about what I did. I had a long standing relationship, and you can't believe, going from making your clients whole, settling with clients you had in 2011 to half a dozen years later in 2017, you start making decisions that 5 years later, in November 17th of 2022, I surrendered to the Federal Medical Center Devens. And I would have went to a minimum security camp, but because I had a liver transplant, I had to go to a medical center.
I want you to explain how you got to the transplant, because I've heard the story, and it's, again, if you read a book, you might say that it might be fiction. But in your case, it's no fiction at all. So please share your story about the liver transplant.
By June 2020, I was dying. The way I was drinking at that point, my skin was completely yellow. My body was so swollen that two female EMTs couldn't lift me from my bed at my house. They had to call in the fire department to extract me from my house like a piece of furniture. And the doctors at Columbia University, New York Presbyterian Hospital on 168th Street, Manhattan, looked at me and said, "You need a liver transplant or you won't survive." I had the highest MELD score. So the MELD score is, I believe, 0 to 40, and I had the highest score. And it means you're expected to die within days without a transplant. And that was June of 2020. July 22nd, and they had to see if I would be able to withstand it if they were able to get one. And I was never on the list. So July 22nd of 2020, in epicenter Manhattan, there was peak COVID going on. I got a transplant, and hospitals were overwhelmed at that time. And I heard people were dying in the hallways, and it was just a surreal experience. And somehow they found me a liver, Andrea. The surgery took 15 hours, nearly double the normal time. And when I woke up in the ICU, I was in a glass room surrounded by other glass rooms, and everyone in those rooms were on a ventilator, and a lot of them weren't making it. Then the doctor came in after I woke up from intubation and came in with the news that should have killed me. The liver, they said the liver we gave you had COVID in it, and we're going to start treating you in a few minutes, and we're going to start treatment immediately. And I had 110 staples on each side of your body. I had a lot of fluids coming out of my body. And so I was placed back on the ventilator for 10 days, and I had what I could only describe as a near-death experience the first time. And I remember it was kind of like death tapping you on the shoulder, and you could just stay asleep and not wake up. But I guess God whispered in my ear and said, "Not yet." And then I woke up from that. And after waking up from that, within 24 hours, I had double respiratory failure. Both of my lungs collapsed, and I went back on a ventilator for 8 days. I was never expected to wake up from that. And when I opened my eyes, with all the tubing and the strapping around your face, there was a priest in my room. I think he was giving me my last rites. When I woke up, I didn't even know what was going on. Then I had sepsis, then I had septic shock. that is a very high percentage of fatality, septic shock. And then I had cytomegalovirus, which is a blood virus spreading throughout my bloodstream. And so I was 6 weeks in the ICU. I was only really a few patients waking up and making it out of there, but I didn't leave the hospital. I moved up to the transplant floor, and it was like heaven getting out of ICU, which was hell. I survived the COVID infected liver transplant during the worst pandemic in a century. I was on ventilators for 18 days, and everyone around me didn't make it. I had these 110 staples running up and down my body in the shape of a chevron or like a Mercedes emblem that I'll carry for the rest of my life. And those scars remind me every single day I was given a second chance that thousands of people didn't get, and I refused to waste it.
That
But
sounds
then,
like four different chances.
So many medical conditions that could have killed you.
but here's what like really broke me during that time when it was yeah the medical hell, yes, the near death experiences, the addiction that destroyed my liver. It was completely my fault. And then the people I hurt during my addiction, their pain isn't going to end when my physical pain ended, and I couldn't undo what I did. I could only own it completely and commit to being someone different. And that was like, I feel part of my a resurrected self, that that person was left behind in that hospital.
And prison came after this, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So I was in the hospital from June of 2020 until October of 2020. I was lying down for 3 months and I had to learn how to walk again. And then I was released. Within 6 months after that is when the SEC called me and said, "We'd like to speak to you." And I had clarity for the first time. I had a clear mind and I was grateful to be alive. And every day I wake up and I'm endlessly grateful. I said, I have to turn myself in.
Forgive me if this question is a little crude, but do you think that that near death experience with the transplant, if that wouldn't have happened, do you think you would have had a different outlook on the phone call that you got?
I had the same question.
That's a great question. Okay, so I don't know if I would have made it to that phone call, but if I would have, I was such a Jekyll and Hyde at that point. I wasn't the person who I was my whole life in that period because I started drinking very late in my life, and it was really that slippery slope from 2011 and then 2015 and then 2017. At some point, hopefully, I would have had some sense that I would have said, yes, you have to own what you did and fully accept responsibility and have complete ownership. But I know that this self that I did make it out of the hospital because I had another divine intervention. When I came out of the hospital, the Monsignor of my church, who comes to find out he's 43 years sober, he found out how a liver transplant and he called me and I said, he became my sponsor and he brought me into AA. I was never in AA. That was another piece of divine intervention.
Yeah. You're definitely surrounded by angels that put you on the right track to help other people that might not see things the way you see them now. And
And then,
that's a miracle.
going into prison November 17th to 22 to FMC Devons, I thought that because I was going into a medical center that, you know, things would be okay. And knew I was going into solitary when I surrendered because of the COVID protocols. My lawyer told me you're going to have to go into quarantine for however many days they let you out. They're going to let you out. And before I surrendered, my transplant team got in touch with the prison and let them know that, you have an inmate surrendering in the next few weeks. He's very fragile. He takes his immunosuppressants twice a day or he dies. And so I felt comfortable going there. You can't bring your medicine in because they give you generics. Even though I surrendered with my medicine, I surrendered with all my paperwork, and it was different than what I thought. So I didn't get my medication until the first 3 days, and when I was in the shoe, realize it that yeah, they put me in solitary for 7 days. I didn't know how many days I was going to be in there for. Yes, dirty cell, broken shower, I'm drinking water from the sink with my hands, and I have a very suppressed immune system with the transplant. And Columbia Hospital contacted the prison before I arrived, and they sent the exact medications, exact dosages, instructions, and I didn't get my meds for 3 days. And, I was banging on the soundproof door every time I heard the keys or a guard walking by. And, you're timing their steps to the door and, you know, trying to let them hear you. And then finally, after 3 days, a female officer intervened, heard me, and got my medicine. But I could already feel my body changing. I could feel things in my torso. And even though I felt it, my body started attacking my liver and seeing it as a foreign object because I didn't take my anti rejection meds for 72 hours and my immunosuppressants. And 3 weeks after being in prison, December 12th of 2022, I had severe liver rejection and they couldn't treat me in the prison. So they had to send me to Boston, to Beth Israel. And at the hospital, of course, you're chained to the bed, your legs are shackled, one arm handcuffed, two guards watching me 24/7 in 8-hour shifts, sitting directly next to me.
Every time I hear something like it drives me up the wall.
But I did this, and I believe in punishment. If you do something wrong, you have to hold yourself account. You have to own what you did, and whatever comes, you have to endure it. And I think it's spending Christmas Eve and Christmas Day chained to the bed. The thing was, I couldn't call my wife, and I couldn't call anyone. And you're fighting liver rejection. They're treating me with 5 straight days of intravenous. That my arms were exploding. It was very thick going through. It was burning. And I just, you're there, you're like, all right, it's December 23rd. My wife doesn't know where I am. I spent Christmas in chains fighting for liver rejection while my wife had the worst Christmas of her life, calling the prison, no one telling her where I was or if I was alive. And that's when I learned the most important lesson about federal prison. The system doesn't really care about my survival, and it's medical care is optional and you're there for punishment. And to the system, I had a year and a day sentence. It almost became a death sentence. And that's when I understood that early release really wasn't, just about freedom for me. It was about just surviving and just getting home as, if I was going to get home. Because when they sent me back to the prison, they put me back into solitary until January 5th. And then the same thing happened for the first 2 days. And then they were giving me certain milligrams were off. And it was January 5th is when I called my wife from December 12th. And then, you call her and you don't want her to worry. And you're like, I'm fine. Everything is fine. I had liver rejection. I'm back in the prison now. And she's like, what? So, I didn't have a medical release form or a HIPAA form or a power of attorney in prison. And you have to have these things if you have medical issues, and you have to walk them over to the records department, and you have to make sure they make copies and it's in your file. So if anything does happen, that if your family calls the prison, they can let them know what's going on with you. But they don't let you know unless, you die in prison, unfortunately.
I understand the idea of punishment, but there's a certain line that's crossed, like how it was with you, where it's inhuman. And that doesn't help anybody because to them, it costs them more money to have multiple guards on standby. It costs you more heartache because obviously it's not a good place to be in. It costs your family more because they don't know where you are. And I had that same issue with my mom too when she was in the SHU. Obviously not to the same extent, but I know what that's like. It's all just a mental game for everybody involved. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't learn that lesson. And they end back in prison. And it seems like such a mental trick. And it really drives me up the wall.
Yeah. I was in the SHU because of COVID. Altogether, 33 days. The first time because I was just exposed to somebody that had COVID, although I tested negative twice. And then when I had COVID again. So, and the first time they took me, they didn't know anything about me. So I was in the shoe and I couldn't tell them where I was.
And we kept calling, and they kept saying, "Oh, she's not here." They weren't even telling. I mean, we knew that she was there because she's been there for the past however many months. She's not here. We're like, "What? Where did she go? Where did you take her?" And we kept calling. We called the main center in Colorado. Oh my god, we made so many phone calls. And it was like, what, the fourth or fifth day when you called us?
Yeah. So I understand punishment, but what happens with the federal prison system in this country is beyond punishment.
Right.
Yes, there's really
And
no compassion.
let's say that although I don't understand being inhumane to a person who committed a violent crime, let alone us who are white collar crimes. So we're definitely not going to hurt anybody. Why they're treating us with such a level of carelessness to human life, basically. That's what it is.
Was they really disliked the white collar people. They looked at them as privileged, and it's strange, but yes. And after that, on January 5th, coming out of the shoe and just calling my wife, let her know I'm okay. You're in the shoe New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. It's my wife's birthday on New Year's Eve, and coming out, I was still very sick. And when they brought me back to my unit, no one wanted to say they had COVID because, like you said, they would put you in the shoe right away. And there was so many guys walking around that they didn't go to medical that they had COVID. And now here I am. They had to halt my immune system to stop the rejection. So I'm like at the most, you put me back in general population, everyone's sick in my unit. 250 guys is like 1,100 guys in the prison, but my building had 250. And I got very sick again, and they had to rush me out of the prison, and they sent me to Boston again, February 8th until February 13th, because I had acute kidney injury. And so when before they came to get me, because they weren't telling me my blood results, they were taking blood from me, but they didn't let you know anything. And every time I used to walk up to the medical unit in my prison, I used to be like, "Hey, do you know my blood results?" Because they would take it from me every Monday and Thursday after I had the rejection. And I just wanted to know my numbers once. Am I stable? What's going on? I still don't feel right. Many guys are sick in I had a fever one time that you can't get, of course. There's no medicine in prison, no antibiotics, nothing, just cough drops. And even though I was in a medical center. And so when I came back from acute kidney injury, they were trying to give me IVs. They couldn't even give me an IV properly. I'm very, very passionate about healthcare for the BOP. Hopefully, a lot changes, but I know it works very slow. It's a very slow turning wheel for the BOP, and I was just very grateful to be released.
And to be well. And I hope that now your health is well taken care of.
Yes, I'm the most stable and the best health that I've been ever since my transplant. When I was in the hospital the second time, I told my wife on the phone before I got rushed to the hospital again. I said, I'm really not feeling well. And I got an emergency contact with another inmate. And I said, hey, if they rush me out of here again and they send me to Boston, call your wife and tell your wife to call my wife and just to let her know that, I got rushed out again. So he did. And so my wife called my doctors at Columbia, New York Presbyterian, and they called the Boston hospital that I was at. And they told my doctors, yes, he's here. We don't know how many days he's going to be here for. So my wife found out, and she was calling the hospital in Boston that I was at. And the guards found out that were by, because they had a log book. The guards that were by my side 24/7, they had this book. They had to write down every nurse, every time they served me, giving me meds. Everyone that came into my room, because my door was shut, I wasn't allowed to go walk in the hallways or anything like that. And so when they brought me back to the prison, they have to give that logbook to the lieutenant that gives it to the warden. And because the safety of the institution when you're outside of the prison is very, very high. Even though I'm a minimum security guy, you treat it like, high security. You're in a room that you never come out of. You're under a ghost name. So even if someone calls the hospital and say, "Do you have a patient, D. Gregorio there?" They look in the computer and you're not there. And I found out afterwards that you're under like an invisible, you're just invisible in the hospital. So my wife called the hospital a few times. One of the nurses, the first time, was nice. And she says, "Yes, he's here. This is what's going on with him." So it was a few days later, she called again. She was calling often. And finally, it was a commotion and the guards got upset. And I said, I don't know what's going on. I said, "Listen, my wife found out where I am." I said, "What would your wife do?"
Yeah.
I think they're equally as brainwashed. I mean, you have to be brainwashed to work in a place like that. I mean,
Yeah,
just
to
as you
treat
said, the
people.
judges are human, but the guards, it's almost like they're not human. I don't know. I think over the course of you being in, I met one guard who was human, I could say. Those numbers are not very good.
It was, I hate to say it, it was like that where I was too. I wasn't talking to the guards at all. I didn't talk to them by my side at all. I wasn't saying anything to them, and they weren't. Yes, they're not the nicest people. Some of them, they weren't in the best of moods. I don't know if they wanted to become FBI agent, they failed out. I don't know if they wanted to become a cop and they couldn't do it, but they weren't. I don't know really who grows
Yeah.
up wanting to be a corrections officer.
They definitely had issues with themselves, not with you.
Yes, yes. They don't
Because
like seeing,
people who,
yeah, they don't like if you're happy. They don't like if you're smiling. They were just very, very, my experience.
no, it's true. I mean, I got to a point, and I explained that in my book. I got to a point where everything was so idiotic that I took it as a joke. And I was laughing to everything that was happening around me because I couldn't take it seriously. It was so silly what was happening that you cannot make those things up. So every time I was smiling, everybody was looking at me, "What are you smiling at?" And I said, "I'm not making fun of anyone. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing of the ridiculousness of the situation. How can you not laugh?"
You couldn't believe it.
Right. Obviously, thank God I was healthy and I didn't have any medical issues while I was there. Even when I had COVID, I tested positive, but I had no symptoms whatsoever. So none. And I wasn't sick at all, so I didn't, except for a few migraines that I had, and I went to medical and they gave me the Imitrex shot. I had no issues. And I somehow could laugh of the situation. I don't think that I would have been in your situation. I could have laughed the same way because it's definitely insane what happened to you.
Yes, believe it or not, I was in very good spirits. It was strange because I don't know. If when I surrendered and you know being in solitary for a week really wasn't, it didn't bother me because I was just in a hospital bed for 3, 4 months straight. I didn't get out of bed for 3 months, so that didn't bother me. And it was just getting your medicine. And then even in the hospital, I was just so grateful that they sent me to Beth Israel Deaconess and they could stop the rejection because how I saw some of the old timers in there get treated in FMC Devons, and there was no, the doctor was hardly ever there. So when I saw other guys, when you're there and you see not just yourself, and you just see, you're like, hey, they're going through it as well, and they're going to be here much longer than me. And I thought a year and a day was going to be a death sentence. And thank God I was able to go to home confinement. But you know what it was, Andrea, I studied what the BOP wanted, right? When I got sentenced, I said, okay, I'm going to create a release plan. I'm creating this blueprint for a reentry plan because that was the most important thing to the BOP. So when you surrendered, when you went to Danbury around the 30-day mark, when you have the team meeting, when you meet your case manager the first time, I gave my release plan to my case manager and I had to like, pitch it. I had to sell it to her to get it into my file, to upload it to my central file. And that affected a lot of people who hold sway over our freedom. Like, when the case manager saw, because I had to explain to my case manager the First Step Act. I said, okay, the first step, because first she was like, what is that? I said, it's my reentry plan. I was working on this before surrendering. I just want you to know I'm going to of course, be 100% compliant here. I'm going to maximize my time to be as productive as possible. I'm not going to inundate you. I won't bother you. But she's like, what are you going to be, doing this stuff for? I said, well, not only because of the First Step Act, productive activity is considered the first time in the federal system. And she goes, it is productive activity? I said, yes. I'm sure you have access to the First Step Act. And so, long story short, when getting back to what you said earlier, the recidivism rate, 67%, the reoffenders, they look at us all the same. They looked at me like, other guys who, were there, and I had to separate myself and prove worthy of why I'm worthy to go home early. Because more than 50% of my unit was able to go home and, they weren't getting released. And I did little things like I wrote a book report after every book that I read. That was productive activity. I know it sounds very grammar school like, and it is, but I wanted to be as productive as possible. And I wrote a monthly report card on myself. I gave it to my case manager once a month. I just went in there when they had open house for a minute. I said, can you please add this to the back of my release plan? And then come to find out, she was reading my book reports. And when I went in there like the third or fourth time, and she knew what was going on with me. And I said, I hope to make it out of here. I hope this isn't the last set of book reports that I'm going to give you, I told her. So she approved my release, and then it had to go up the chain of command for signatures and approvals. And
Seven of them.
yeah, yeah. And I almost didn't clear medical because I'm still serving my sentence at home, and the BOP is responsible
Yeah.
for that.
So now I understand why you're doing the great work that you're doing. So now tell us about what you're doing, because I know that mitigation, and you explained that it's very, very important. And you work with high profile cases and you work with white collar people. Please explain what you're doing from the beginning to the end for people to understand.
Law school, and I don't teach law. You get your lawyer, yes, but there's certain things that what law
I
school.
went to law school and I can say that law
They
school don't teach that. So please.
So before my pre-sentence interview, I knew that it was the most important thing, and I had to really, say certain things. And I got a personal narrative. I got my personal backstory fully attached. I wrote this 4,000 word letter to the judge. I sent it to my probation officer that conducted my pre-sentence interview, and I got it attached to the PSR. My lawyer didn't know that. He told me the PSI is a 20-minute background, where you went to school, who your mom and dad is, who your siblings, do they know what you did? Is it okay if we call them? And so forth. And it'll be done within a half hour. I understood it as something totally different. I'm indirectly speaking to the judge. Everything is a matter of record. They're going to give a recommendation to the judge. And so I wanted my personal backstory fully attached to my PSR, and it is, and it was. So that's one piece of mitigation that the lawyer doesn't know. And this is before we're sentenced. When I was released, I went into Columbia University Business School, Justice Through Code, and I started learning technology. It's for formerly incarcerated people. It's an amazing program. And then from there, I started taking course after course and really, with a lot of AI, and I'm building certain things right now. Two is in beta, three is in development, one is in late stage development, two is in early stage development, and all the certifications and everything that I took, I think I have over 80 now, is just for building this company that no one else, because I want to incorporate some tech, and I have a proprietary algorithm actually that goes back 10 years of case study. It can analyze judges, it could see where they gave leniency and mercy to, what were the mitigating factors, but that's not out yet. But the human side of mitigation, right? So there's certain things that you can do. So since being home and consulting over 300 federal defendants and having all different stages of the journey, whether they come, I'll give you an example. Like the last one came right after they were sentenced, and I created a release plan for them, like I did for myself. I told them exactly what to say to the case manager, get it in your central file, get it uploaded. And out of a 20-month sentence, he served 4 months. It was unheard of. A 20% sentence is to serve in prison. And the attorney that referred me that client has the recommendation on my LinkedIn profile. He wrote, it's verified. But then what really hit me was when clients had better outcomes than myself. Like there was a gentleman who had a 168-month guideline sentence, and he got a year and a day. And he called me after sentencing, crying with his wife, and saving someone that amount of time, not saving someone, he put in the work. You have to be willing to do the work and work at your case, obsessed with your case. Like I was working on my case nonstop, working 2 jobs, right? So when I went to hire my lawyer that day, when the SEC called me, the lawyer said, you cannot go into your firm anymore. You have to walk away from Wall Street. You can't call any more of your clients. You cannot trade. And I had open positions. I had other clients. And so I went to work at Amazon. I went to work at a golf course, and I was just so grateful for the work. I felt great for the first time in years. And, so that's very important. There's a lot of people that just they think I'm going to hire the best attorney, and they wait at home, or they're not really. The judge wants to see, what did you do leading up to sentencing? You were charged. What did you do? They want to see transformation. They want to see not only remorse, accountability, they want to see certain things that you have to do. The lawyer's not going to do it for you. He put in all the work. He was really doing things above and beyond. I put this compliance rebuilt program for him off of the DOJ 7 pillars of compliance that they look at. He had that in his sentencing memorandum. He had different things that I didn't do for my case. And then there was someone with 121 months, and this is all on Trustpilot. So when I came home, I started consulting for the top consulting firm in the country. And then when they started having outcomes, and then when I started getting certified in tech and wanted to bring something, because they were doing things differently, they were more of a transactional side, and they didn't really care the way I did. Like I was talking to the client, if they would call me 2 in the morning, I would call them. I know what they're going through, and so, and they were like a boilerplate template, one size fits all, and they weren't incorporating any technology that was coming out. So I said, so after Columbia, I went into Defy. Defy is an amazing organization that, we had a pitch night, and, my company came in first place. And then that's when I launched it just, recently. And then I just recently did my first compassionate release. I never did a compassionate release before. There was someone serving a life sentence, and the lawyer came to me and said, can you help with this? I looked at the case, and he built up a stellar track record. He was in prison for 30 years since 96, same age as me, 49. And he got his college degree. He saved someone's life. He was like, zero disciplinary infractions. So I said, yes. I said, absolutely. I was like, so he's right now in a Bronx halfway house. He's released. So many different cases where, there was one case where I incorporated this ESG. It was governance. It was, the judge said they'd never seen anything like this. And if it's local, I'll go to sentencing. But I hear from the lawyer what happened. I hear from the defendant what happened. Recently, there was someone who got 9 years shaved off of his sentence. And he was, well, let's say, for example, this individual was earning I don't know, 400,000 annually, and you save him 9 years, I mean, that's like 3.6 million in earnings. Like he could come back within a year, he could go back to working. So there's a return on invest. There's different things that when you look at it, yes, it's time with the family and everything, and you know, someone's life doesn't get destroyed. But there's a lot of it that's also being there, you know, as like their therapist, and to just let them know, say, hey, listen, this isn't, you know, the end of the road. This is because there's a lot of coping that they can't cope. So they're drinking, they're doing drugs. And, you know, I talked to them about that. And there's a lot of times you have to talk them off the ledge and they can't cope with going to prison. I say, listen, going to prison is the easy part. Going through the journey is the hard part. You have all the unknowns. You know, you have to get your plea deal, then you have to plead guilty. You want to worry about getting out on an unsecured bond. Then you have to prepare for your PSI. You have to prepare the sentencing memorandum. Then you have to prepare for sentencing. And then you don't know where you're going. You have to wait for your designation. Okay. And then our brains are always designed to think of the worst. And you go into a minimum security camp and you're like, wow, this is it. And the biggest thing is boredom and missing your family in a minimum security camp. So you got to come back from this. Listen, I had so many divine interventions. I went from being carried outside of my house by firefighters to helping clients reduce 126 months down to 12 months. Your worst moments are not your final chapter. It's the prologue to your resurrection. The question is, will you engineer it or will you run from it? Because a lot of people run from it and they're in denial. So your worst moments doesn't have to be your final moments.
And it's really beautiful and important work what you do.
Yeah. And I would really, truly wished that you were doing this work back when I went through the case, because nobody told me. Now I know everything that you're talking about from personal experience. I didn't know anything. Nobody was there to tell me this. And my attorney said, well, this is the normal procedure. They exactly with the PSI. Well, somebody's going to come to you. And plus, I was for 8 months in MCC because I have dual citizenship. The judge denied my bail and I went in. They took me in. So I couldn't prepare. I didn't know anything. And my attorney said, well, the guy that works with the judge will come about 20 minutes and will ask you a few questions, and that's that.
Very difficult to fight a case like that. I'm sorry you got remanded. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And then after 8 months, I was transferred to 8 months in MCC. I was transferred to the camp at Danbury,
And
which was heaven. Comparing to MCC. But I needed the period to wake up. For you was the hospital, and the period that we went through for me was MCC and the horrors of that place. But I guess I needed to go through that. So I am where I am right now because of those hard moments. All the bad moments in life are not the end, are the transformation. And if we allow them and we learn from them, then we're free to live our lives in truth and to help others.
yeah, the fall doesn't destroy you. Running from accountability destroys you. The shame destroys you. Believing the worst version of yourself is the only version that destroys you. I commend your strength. You're doing amazing work for lawyers too. There's so many lawyers that need you, what you're doing, and you have a very specific niche that is needed. And that's what, like when I found out, like I didn't know it was going to turn into a business. I just did this for my case. But then when you come home and you realize, gee, you know, this is needed
So
by
many
so many.
people need this, yes. So you've been very successful before, and now with all the cases and help that you're doing, how do you define success now?
Finding success now is not about money. It's about just you have a purpose, you have the why. Because so many people get caught up in this, they go to prison, they don't have the why, they lose it. So I have it, and I know that, you know what, successes to me when I get a call from someone and says, Joe, my daughter's gonna know her father. My daughter's 3 years old, and I'm only gonna be away, X amount of months, or that's success to me. Not and just helping people go through this and just know like there's to couple mitigation alongside of your lawyer, is very important. Personally, I think I could have had a federal court appointed attorney and just incorporated everything I did, but my lawyer was excellent. He accepted the mitigation, he uses it to this day. He became my first client, my personal attorney. And, mitigation started from capital death penalty lawyers. They're the only ones who, and only a small group of death penalty attorneys. That's where mitigation came from. So that's when I started studying it. After I was studying judges, I found out about mitigation, and I said, how come federal defense, white collar or, drug
Everybody
offenses?
needs this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, it's not a magic bullet. You can give him the GPS coordinates, you could give him the blueprint. The defendant has to be willing to put in the work. And believe it or not, I've seen people, I don't know, people value their freedom differently. And for example, if a lawyer calls me and says, "Hey, can you talk to this defendant?" And yeah, okay, maybe you can help him or we can work together. There's been many instances where I don't want to work with them because they don't have the spark, they don't have the passion, they want the get out of jail free card, they want someone to do the work for them. And yes, I could pick and choose who I want to work with, and slowly, brick by brick, floor for floor, a building where it is now. And I'm not rushing to turn it into a skyscraper. I want to help the people that really, they say, no, I don't want to forfeit all of, I don't want to do what you did. Believe me, I've seen it.
And as I say, you can help people that don't want to be helped.
No,
Yeah.
no. And,
Yeah.
I think more, not just with the mitigation, but if you can now couple it with natural language processing, NLP, and with technology and with certain aspects of incorporating the tech with the mitigation now, that's now like the next generation mitigation. That's cutting edge technology now. I'm able to add another dimension or two to
Yeah.
case. I know it's going to be very, very helpful. Um,
Definitely. Imagine a case manager in a prison forgotten somewhere 50 years ago that gets a report that is processed with computers and AI. They're not going to know where that came from.
yes.
So definitely it's something amazing that can
Yeah.
help people.
Oh, yeah. And, just out of 5 cases, there was 491 months. Between 5 cases of mine, I had 491 months added up of total month exposure. And out of that, it was 41 months. And one person just got probation altogether from 60-month guidelines. So you say to yourself, wow, I helped total months avoided, 50 months avoided out of the 491. And you say to yourself, that's 37 and a half years that you were able to cut off of just 5 cases. So when the facts are fixed, when the judge sees just the facts are fixed, the story is your strategy. And it's scientific knowledge. When you read someone's story, you can remember it 22 times better of just like a statistic or just facts on a page, you know? So you got to turn your case into like a compelling court ready that's you can earn the judge's trust. You can reduce the recidivism, the perceived risk of you being in another courtroom, eliminating that from their mind that you're going to be in another courtroom, justify your mercy. And a lot of it now that I'm doing is backed by neuroscience. It's grounded in mitigation. Yes, it's grounded in law, but
That's
you
great.
really want to, the stories that trigger emotional responses, again, in the brain, you remember it 22 times more effectively than just the raw data alone. And in federal sentencing, the attorney really, that's not what they're taught. It's not their academic theory, but you could use it as your tactical advantage.
Now, if you would talk to a professional that was in the position that you were back then, what would you tell them?
You don't just wake up and say, you're driving a straight line your whole life and you make a 90-degree turn and just go over the cliff. It happens very slowly. You go in the right lane, then you go in the shoulder, then you go off the grass, and then you can rationalize things. And, you sort of like, you don't know, and then all of a sudden you're off a cliff. It's a slippery slope with that as well. And I know there's plenty of people who they can't cope and everything. You have to put these circuit breakers in for yourself because otherwise your machine will just go haywire, right? And that's what I didn't have. And then you're in this culture, it's a greed culture. Yes, I mean, there's 99.5% of people are all doing the right thing. But we're all capitalists, right? We're in a capitalist, Western society, and you want to capitalize and make as much money as possible, of course. But it was just a very toxic environment. And then as soon as you see that toxicity, if it's going into your pores, please just wash yourself off and reinvent, do something else. That's what I would say.
But for that, from my experience working with attorneys, you need a willingness and you need awareness. And a lot of people are afraid to look at themselves in the mirror, unfortunately.
Definitely. And they like to deflect, they like to blame, they like to make excuses. Absolutely 100%. And that's really why I wanted to do this on my own because I want to pick and choose who really, because I take their case like it's my own case. And, 24/7 availability, I'm there for them. Like, last night I had a Zoom with someone that's surrendering on November 17th, the same day I did to begin his 36-month term. And he had family on. I had 10 different windows or 11 different windows. He had family on from Paraguay. He had family on from Argentina. And we were on a Zoom till 10 o'clock.
But these are the people that are willing.
Right.
They're willing, they value their freedom as priceless. No money could put a price tag on getting home 6 months, 10 months, or 6 years to your family. It's much worse for the family than it is for us.
It
Even
is.
though I went through, I put my wife and my family and everyone that cares about me through hell.
And that's the reason why we're doing the podcast together, because she went through hell because of me. Now that we're at the end of the interview, is one question that I ask every guest, and that is, what is one activity in your life that makes you feel more alive?
One activity that makes me feel more alive is I've never cooked, and now I do like cooking. I eat very healthy. I make sure what I put in my body, and I look forward to getting a recipe, like, making sure I have X amount of spices in and everything. And I love cooking, and we used to go to Harry's for lunch and then Delmonico's for dinner like 3 times a week, and I never cooked. And that gives me joy that I do with my wife. We don't have children, and my wife is my rock, and she's my flame. She's the one that, every day when she used to come into the hospital, and I put her through so much. She used to come into the hospital for those 90 plus days that I was in the hospital. Every day she drove in to Manhattan, peak COVID. There was George Floyd riots, I believe, going on in Manhattan. There was so much stuff, and she never got sick. She came up, they let her stay with me 2 hours a day. And I used to cry when she walked in, and I used to cry when she left. And I stayed alive. That was like my flame every day to see her tomorrow because I knew she was coming in every single day. So it's really my wife. Everything is for my wife.
Have you written a book about this?
No.
Well, I'm sure that
That should be in the cards pretty soon because that's a fantastic story.
Really?
from survival to divine intervention to love to relationships, you have it all.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for saying that. I can't thank you enough. I got like a brick in my throat right now.
Thank you so much for your time with us today and for sharing your journey. Thank you for everything that you're doing for people that need you. I truly hope that we remain connected and we see all the great things that you're doing for people.
Likewise, the pleasure is mine and definitely to be continued.
Thank you, our listeners. For more conversations and more guests, please subscribe and follow us. Thank you. We'll see you next week.